Hello everyone, thank you for joining us for our breakout session today, Critical Incidents Community-Based Recovery in Primary Schools. The keynote session yesterday from Ami Rahman and Rachel Jewell focused on the importance of a planned response to critical incidents in uncertain times and provided us all with some fantastic food for thought. And we look forward to unpacking some of the themes from that presentation for primary schools in our session today. We're conscious, as Amy mentioned, that we're currently working in schools in really complex and uncertain times, and so our thoughtful and measured responses to critical incidents can be even more important than ever. My name is Melinda Phillips. I'm a BU Education Consultant with the New South Wales Headspace Schools team, and it's great to be here with Joyce Tam, a Senior Clinical Consultant on our team. Would you like to share a bit about yourself, Joyce?
Thanks, Melinda. It's great to be here today. I am a psychologist for almost 20 years and have worked with children and young people in private practice, non-profit and government organisations in the community and education settings. So before we start, I would just like to acknowledge that Melinda and I are meeting on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay our respects to the elders past and present. And as an initiative with national reach, we would like to extend our respects to all elders and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across Australia. And today, we have people joining us from all over the country, so please do feel free to share the land that you're joining us from today by adding the name of the country that you're on in the chat box. Our moderators will also be sharing a link in the chat to the map of the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, which can help if you would like to know which land or country that you're on. And OSBU is a suite of resources within BU to assist learning communities to consider Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives. And we recognise the contribution that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the development of these resources. And we're also sharing a link to these resources with you just now in the chat box. So just talking a little bit more about BU. So for those who don't know about BU or haven't been to one of our virtual conferences before, BU is a national mental health initiative for educators and is the organiser of this conference. And it is led by Beyond Blue in partnership with Early Childhood Australia and Headspace. And BU is completely free and available to every educators in early learning services and schools across Australia. And BU also empowers educators to support children and young people's social emotional well-being and their own mental health. It offers educators online professional learning, fact sheets, online events, and also other resources, and as well as learning communities equipped with tools and processes to implement a whole school learning community approach to mental health and well-being. The discussion throughout the conference will also be highlighting some of the BU resources, tools and professional learning, just to show you how BU can support a whole school and a whole service approach to mental well-being.
Thanks so much for telling us a bit more about BU, Joyce. And recent events have certainly really reinforced that need to have a whole school or whole early learning service plan toward mental health and well-being. And this conference covers 3 themes over 10 sessions over the 2 days, and today is our second day of the program. And these themes are around mental health and well-being as a whole community approach. And this is important because we know that the most effective approach to mental health prevention and promotion is one that involves that whole community. So children and young people and their families, the leaders in schools, teachers in schools and other staff as well, and the whole wider community too. The second theme is around prepare and take care, which is looking at critical incidents in these uncertain times. And finally, taking the opportunity to have a look at what are those benefits for building a strong family and community partnerships. Most of the sessions in these 2 days are aimed at a particular learning stage, so either early learning settings, primary or secondary. And this session with Joyce and I today is relevant for primary school settings.
Thanks, Mel. So we always want to create a safe space when we learn together, and whether this is online or face-to-face, and we have a shared commitment to learning together. And this means we take care to only share stories in the chat that are appropriate to share and respecting people's confidentiality and privacy. And in addition, today's topic is a big one. Critical incidents impact on all of us as members of school communities, and at times, some of the topic can trigger different emotions or take us by surprise. So please do take care of yourselves throughout this presentation. And afterwards, be sure to do something nice for yourself, perhaps taking yourself outside for a short walk, or just taking a 5-minute break to start and finish your coffee. And reach out for any additional support if you do need that from a colleague, a friend, or family member. And remember that Beyond Blue also have a range of support resources that are available, and the details are on their website.
Thanks, Joyce, and I really like that reminder to look after yourself both now and also afterward. And so, Joyce, what will we be covering today?
Thanks, Mel. So in today's session, we will be unpacking the impacts of critical incidents on members of our primary school communities, and first and foremost, our students, but also families and staff. We'll also be exploring some of the practical strategies to manage critical incidents. And finally, Mel, we'll be discussing on how to prepare, respond, and recover as a community. And we also invite your contribution, and we'd love to see and hear from you via our chat box here. So please do feel free to ask any questions or share your thoughts and comments throughout the session. And our moderators will also continue to share some relevant links and resources to guide you through specific learnings throughout our session today.
Thanks, Joyce. And look, we hear that term critical incident talked about all the time, but what do we actually mean by a critical incident?
Well, Mel, so the World Health Organization shares this definition of a critical incident, and this may occur within the primary school or outside from it. And these challenging events can include a death in the community, an accident, or serious injuries, or natural disasters, to just name a few. And we know that children and young people, school staff, and families can all be impacted by a critical incident, and their experience can naturally be very different from one another, depending on the incident and on a range of related personal and environmental factors. And in addition, not everyone responds to critical incident in the same way. So critical incidents may be overwhelming or threaten to overwhelm each individual's coping capacity, and also coping capacities of the learning community as a whole. So when someone has an experience that overwhelms their ability to cope, we call this trauma. And Emerging Minds has a great set of resources and videos on the definition of trauma, and a link has been shared in the chat box there.
Thanks, Joyce, that's great. So could you take us through what might be some of the impacts of a critical incident, especially as they impact on our primary school children?
Sure, Mel, and this leads us into the first part of our session today. We will be exploring some of the reactions that children may experience following a critical incident.
Great, thank you. And as educators, we're really well placed to notice any changes within our students as they occur. And we know that children can react in a number of ways to critical incidents. We've shared a poll on the slide to gather what your experience has been in this context too, because we know the wealth of experience that's joining us today. And so as educators, what changes do we often first notice in our students? Is it feelings, physical reactions, thoughts, or perhaps students' behaviour? And feel free to take a couple of moments to answer, and we'll share the results of this poll in a moment. And having a little look, it didn't take long for nearly 90% of respondents, thank you for responding, to tell us about behaviour. And that makes a lot of sense to us too, because behaviour, of course, can be the most visible of these reactions, especially in that primary school context. And Joyce, I'll now hand back to you just to tell us a little bit more about what are these children's reactions that we might see after a critical incident.
Thanks, Mel. So as we heard in keynote yesterday, children may react to critical incidents in a range of ways. And these can be normal and natural responses, and for most children, they will resolve in short term. As you can see from this slide here, children may experience physical reactions and body aches and things like headaches and stomach aches, which are quite common to their distress. And cognitively, children may also seem to be a bit more preoccupied or distressed. And on an emotional level, children may appear to be a little bit more anxious than usual, and you may also notice a change with their behavior also. So for example, they may no longer enjoy an activity as much as they do before. And these reactions are usually quite short-lived and they are likely to resolve with time.
Thank you, Joyce. And I think for some children we might see a more significant reaction or response. Could you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, sure. So for some children, we may see a moderate to a severe response to a critical incident. And as educators, we're actually very well placed to actually notice some of these changes. And so their responses may last a bit more longer and be more severe, or may impact on the child's potential to really learn and participate at a school. And also, when students do experience these reactions and responses, we call this trauma response, which we'll in turn explore a little bit more in further details in just a moment.
Great.
So Mel, we've got this slide here which are showing some of the traumatic impacts that children may experience, and these impacts may be more severe and have a more longer lasting impact as what we've discussed before, compared to the milder reactions that we've just talked about in the previous slide. So physically, children may be looking more tired in class or have difficulty concentrating and focusing, and that's possibly due to the lack of sleep or the poor sleep quality that they've been having as well. The cognitive capacity may also be impacted, and you may observe children being quite forgetful and distracted. Emotionally, you may also notice that there's been some mood swings or mood changes, and in terms of the behaviour, you may also notice a bit more risk-taking behaviour or withdrawal behaviour, and this can go either way. Yeah. Other things that you may notice would be that children may regress and behaving in a more younger ways, or have difficulty separating from their caregivers, and they may seem to be a little bit more withdrawn or isolating themselves when they can. And so from a learning perspective, we may also see a decline of functioning at school. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more in this area, the Emerging Minds Community Trauma Toolkit is a fantastic resource and contains more information about trauma and impacts on children.
Thanks, Joyce, and thanks for telling us a little bit more about trauma in children. And I was wondering if you could comment briefly around grief too.
Sure, Mel. And look, some students, whilst going through a critical incident, they may also experience grief after a critical incident, and because of the losses that they have just experienced. And this may be a loss of a loved one, but it can also be due to other losses as well. So things like including loss of home or belongings or pets, amongst many others.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And so what can we as educators do to support children after a critical incident?
Yes, well, Mel, I guess noticing how children's actually coping is one of the foremost important steps that we can take. So if we do notice a child experiencing some of the responses that we have just shared on this slide and the previous slide, our connection to the student and our classroom routines can be very important for the child to cope with the trauma reactions and responses. And also, what we can do is starting to collate some data on what we're seeing. So for example, using the Beatles observation tools that is available on BU, and share our concerns with someone on the wellbeing team who can then help to make a decision about what the next steps to take.
Great, thank you. And there's some really great steps that you've just mentioned that we can take. So we can work to stay connected with each student, we can maintain our classroom routines, we can document what we're seeing, and when we need to, we can reach out to those wellbeing team members for a little bit of extra support.
Absolutely, Mel.
And before we talk about the other steps that we can take on this slide, it's really important to acknowledge that educators have often been impacted by the critical incident too. And this means that we can be having some of those same reactions ourselves. We need to take good care of our own health and take steps to look after ourselves too, and reach out for help if we need it, so that we can continue to support our students. And Joyce, you've mentioned a couple of really good things that we can do. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Yeah, sure. I guess some of the things that we can look into about supporting children is that, whilst we've been sort of working on our relationships with children all this time and building on the social and emotional skills, this is really the time where this hard work really pays off, and we can draw upon some of those skills and work to strengthen them. And we can give children that opportunity to talk about their feelings and encouraging them to practice their emotional regulation strategies. We can also focus on the process of learning as well as the actual learning itself to help students to reset settle back into their routine. And some of the things that we can consider would be building some movement breaks or brain breaks so that we can have this thoughtful approach about things like homework, what is necessary, and then providing some opportunities for students to engage in more enjoyable activities and, building that social connections with one another. And I guess the other theme, Mel, that we can also consider would be sort of the parent and carer support for children, which is another vital strategy to assist children in coping after a critical incident. So in BU, we have the family partnership domain, which has some terrific ideas about engaging parents. And at its heart of this, it's really about working together to support children and sharing that observation and information with each family and being conscious of that experience that they too might have had due to this critical incident. We can also provide quality information and providing that consistently over time from resources such as Beyond Blue, Kids Helpline, and other helpful resources which are available on how to best support their child, and so that we can facilitate that opportunities for families to connect with us or with other families at the school too.
Great.
Yeah. Also, I guess some children may need that extra support after a critical incident. And, we've spoken about that critical, the trauma reactions and responses after a critical incident, and also about grief earlier on. So in consultation with the wellbeing team, we can look into referrals to the specialist support such as the school counsellors or psychologists, guidance officers, and other external professionals who can offer that support to parents and carers, and so that the best support can be put in place for the students so they are well taken care of.
Great. Oh, well, Joyce, thank you so much for that overview of children's reactions and responses, or those potential reactions, I guess, to critical incidents and what they can experience and how we can support them. And now we're moving on to the next part of our presentation.
Thanks, Mel. So in the next part of our presentation, we'll be recapping on what the keynote and review some of the key areas of the critical incident management plan and why they are so important.
Thanks, Joyce. So can you tell us a little bit more about critical incident management?
Yeah, sure, Mel. So the most effective way to respond to and recover from a critical incident in a primary school setting really involves having a planned and structured approach. So by having a planned and structured approach, this really allows us to provide a supportive, caring response that considers the mental health well-being of the whole school community. And it offers a degree of safety and security as the key personnel are supported in that moment in their decision making by making these thoughtful and considered plan prior at an earlier time. And the community also knows that we have a plan in place and that's going to be enacted. And this knowledge is actually really protective for members of the community should a critical incident occur.
So it sounds like having a plan can be really important, especially if as a community we're feeling pretty overwhelmed at the time. Can you tell us a little bit more about what might be involved with a plan?
Sure, and that's right. So having a typical quality critical incidents plan can contribute to reducing further risk. It does promote that connectedness within the school community, and it also encourages help seeking and supports the community. And when this plan is enacted, it will be enacted as a whole school level with key people already identify and prepare for these essential roles. So all staff will have a role to play, which include things like modifying classroom routines and structures, monitoring and supporting of students, and communicating with individual families, and also looking after themselves, which is really important. And we'll briefly go through preparedness, response and recovery in just a moment before we share a case study about how a primary school actually managed in a critical response space.
Thanks, Joyce, that's great. So let's have a look at this first step, and that's talking about preparedness and what we need to take note of when we're preparing for a critical incident response.
Sure. So, Mel, firstly, it's really important to create a plan that involves key stakeholders. So, assigning various roles to staff members should a critical incident occur, and also having in mind to have regular reviews of this plan also. So in our work, we have seen how critical incident planning process can uncover a whole range of important considerations that can then be organised and considered prior to them being needed. And in addition, a plan creates that structure and really helps people to feel that sense of control, which then in turn helps to reduce that stress and pressure that comes with that sudden and dramatic change for the community. So the critical incident response plan should also include things like details of contact numbers of the emergency response team or any other key relevant stakeholders, and also identifies this first set of actions that needs to be taken. And you've got tasks allocated with any contingency plans in place should these occasions do occur. So for example, if the critical incident happened during the school holiday, or if the incident happened on site. Another important aim about this critical incident plan is how can we actually return back to the norm, so restoring some of that sense of routine as soon as possible, and to ensure monitoring and supportive structures can be put in place as well. And we also need to review the emergency and critical incident management plan regularly too, as what we've said at the beginning. And that's really to sort of adapt for things like staff changes or if there's new things in place, and really to stay up to date with the content, and also the location of the plan is actually really important.
Yeah, look, I can see how that would be a really practical consideration. We need to know where the plan is,
Absolutely,
where it's stored. That's great. And we've shared a reflective question on this next slide. What's the most important part of your school's critical incident plan? And please feel free to share what you think in the chat box. And if you're not necessarily at the moment across the details of your school's plan, if you could share with us what you think is the most important part of a school incident plan, that would be terrific as well. And Joyce, as our participants take some time to put their comments in, can you share what you think with this question?
Sure, absolutely, Mel. So I guess in summary, I think all parts are important and preparedness is really the key. So during a critical incident, there are often times of uncertainties amongst that circumstance, and also the impacts can sometimes be quite complex. So having a clear and concise critical incident management plan can really provide that overarching framework for preparing, responding to, and recovering from a critical incident, which is the central part of a school's critical incident plan. And also having a good understanding and recognizing the impacts of a critical incident is actually a really vital first step in this process. So with this understanding, educators can then plan a response that creates an environment that promotes that recovery, and children can then be provided with opportunities to express how they're actually feeling and navigating through those tricky moments, and then resettling back into their routine that is predictable and supportive. And I guess importantly though, having a critical incident plan that you and your school will be well placed to manage a critical incident if this do occur in unfortunate circumstances. And this is why reviewing regular reviews and having those up-to-date plans would be an integral part of this process.
Thank you, Joyce. And we've had a few great comments shared as well. One from Carol Callan, who said roles and responsibilities and communication strategies.
Wow, yes, that's absolutely very, very important, particularly with communication.
Having those planned beforehand makes such a difference because you're not trying to figure out in the moment how to communicate. And also Kathy Smith has shared actually having a clear plan that's regularly updated.
Absolutely, and we can't stress enough having that clear plan and updating that plan as you go, because things at school do change over time and they change relatively quickly, so updating that plan is actually quite crucial as part of that process. So thank you for sharing.
And Emma Louise has commented that every staff member should know who the response team is.
Yes, absolutely. So that response team would be the first person that you may want to go to should a critical incident occur. So that's a fantastic point there.
And finally from Steve, thanks Steve, a clear sequence of events or tasks to ensure that nothing's missed.
Absolutely. So sometimes it might even be important to just write down a set of lists of tasks to undertake and ensuring that we have actually covered most of those tasks as well. So thank you, Steve, for sharing that.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. That's great. And Joyce, we've now spoken about preparing for a critical incident, but could you tell us a little bit more about what we do if it actually happens and we are responding to a critical incident?
Sure, Mel. So I guess the first step to undertake to address would be the immediate health, welfare and safety of everyone involved, and also those who are being affected by the critical incident. And we also need to start working through the critical incident plan with your designated team and getting in touch with any appropriate education bodies or authorities in line with your policies and procedures. And also trying to identify potentially vulnerable people in your community who may be students, staff or family, and that would probably need that little bit of extra support and help, and really making sure that support is available, and also not just to those people but to people across the board as well, for students, staff and families. And as well as this, you might want to also consider providing some general support and help seeking contacts for the community so that they too will be able to seek support if that's needed as well.
That's a great idea, and some of those points are really important, and thinking through those vulnerable people is such an important step. Is there anything else that you'd like us to consider when we're thinking about responding?
Absolutely, Mel. So I think we've touched on these prior in our comments here as well. So prioritising communication is also another vital step. So, and this may sometimes feel like an extra task or a little bit more redundant, but it is actually really crucial that the team continues to deliver that effective and appropriate communication to all those who have been impacted. It's not just about communicating about the critical incident, but also providing that ongoing information and sources of help for students, staff and family. And that's actually vital, and continuing to encourage that help-seeking messaging across all members of the community when it's needed. And after the incident, also having a debrief is actually really supportive as well for the team. And finally, we can also look into continue to monitor the students and staff well-being after the critical incident, as well as providing some of that well-being support when required as we head towards recovery.
Great, thank you. And all of those things that you've just covered, it really speaks to the importance of what you mentioned about us being prepared so that we can be across all of those tasks if we're faced with them in recovery and in responding to a critical incident. And I guess now if we talk about moving into that next stage toward recovery for our community after an incident, what would you like to share about that?
Sure, Mel. So following a critical incident, it is really important to remember promoting that engagement in learning, and whilst offering children opportunities to really express how they feel. And we also want to work in ways that are flexible, relaxed and at a slower pace, and adapting that learning activities when necessary and appropriate. And as we mentioned earlier on, we want to create that sense of safety at school and provide ways for children to express their feelings, whether they're fears or other reactions that may come up during a critical response. And staying connected with the children and the family is actually a real priority. And we can use a range of ways to keep that connection going and communication. And also, making sure that these communications are timely and communicating in an honest way so that we understand what we're going through as a whole community, and also maintaining that trusting relationship. Some of the things we also want to consider would be re-establishing some of the routines, even though some of these can be a new routine. And this helps to provide that sense of normality and stability for everyone, not just for the student, but across the whole learning community, including students, staff and families.
Great. So we're hearing really loud and clear about the importance of routines and the importance of communication,
Absolutely,
which is terrific. And what about any ongoing support for the community?
Yes, so we also want to continue to provide support that we've offered in the response phase, and retaining some of the focus on communication channels and emotional support for students. And we can do this in a range of age-appropriate ways and supports, and that could include thinking about individual work or group work, peer mentoring, sharings of stories, and we can also think outside the square and also putting in a bit of that creativity in as well with art and music, craft, and social and emotional skills building. And these can be both on formal and informal interactions and interventions. And finally, we can also look into, again, providing that continuing check-in with students, staff and family around their well-being, and also offer access to support as required.
Great. Yeah, that continuing check-in I think is really important. And Now we're going to move into talking about a case study that involves some materials that may be upsetting or trigger emotional responses. It's about a car accident with a school parent. So please feel free to take care of yourselves or reach out for additional support within your school structure if you do need to. And please note we've changed the content of the case study slightly and also changed names and some details just for the purpose of our discussion today. And the case study that Joyce is going to take us through is covering off on those first two steps, so the preparedness and the response stages of a critical incident.
Thanks, Mel. So a case study that I would like to share today involves a primary school parent who was unfortunately injured in a motor vehicle accident that had occurred in the morning before school at an interaction near the school grounds. So the mother was actually quite well known to the staff team and also to the parent community because of all the contribution of the volunteer work that she's done around the school and also for other local events.
Okay, so how did the BU team become involved in this one?
Sure, Mel. So as we know that the BU team are available to provide support for primary schools following a critical incident. So we were initially contacted and notified by the school principal about this critical incident who requested support for the school community.
And what happened following that notification?
Sure. So when firstly, we contacted the school, and the school was actually really well prepared. So they had an emergency response team and a critical incident management plan already in place. And the BAU team was first made contact with the school, and then we worked in collaboration with the emergency response team, which included the principal, the assistant principal, wellbeing coordinator, an education support staff member who was first aid trained, and also a school counsellor.
Great, that was a really good team, and they sound like they had a plan in place.
Yes,
so
they were very organised.
Yeah, great. And so can you take us through how BU provided support to this school as they managed the response?
Sure. So the principal, Jane, and her team, again, they were very organised, and and BU provided some of the secondary consultation support. So Jane let us know that all the immediate health, welfare and physical safety concerns were taken care of, and that the school was already implementing the first steps of their critical incident management plan. So the roles were already assigned to staff members as part of the critical incident plan, and the staff roles include initiating, coordinating and reporting the critical incidents response to relevant bodies and parties, and some were assigned to connecting and monitoring the children's reactions, and also connecting and communicating with the parent body. BU then provided some consultations on how to inform the community and communicate about this critical incident, and this happened after the principal consulted with the family. Following that, Jane also asked BU for some support around identifying and supporting students. And so with the school team, BU started identifying groups of people in the community who might have been affected by this incident. And these groups include any students and families or staff members who might have witnessed the accident or being at the scene. We've also looked into student staff and members of the community who knew the parent and the family quite well, because they may also require a bit of extra support there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and we also identify classmates of the students involved, and also other vulnerable students and staff who may be concurrently experiencing other mental health or social stresses and who have been exposed to the news of this incident. And I guess whilst doing that and talking through the different groups, Jane really found that actually quite helpful in guiding to identify whom of the school community may need sort of that further extra bit of support or that informal check-in. So it really guides how they will actually continue following on that critical incident plan. The other thing we also looked into is actually exploring some of the considerations and mapping out the support for the school community with Jane and her team. And they really took steps to put this in place. And some of these supports include continued checking in and monitoring of the vulnerable students and staff. We've also talked about this before in our previous couple of slides ago about slowing down the pace of the classroom structure and routine. So they've put this in place with some movement breaks and brain breaks in between.
Great.
Yeah, and also the other thing that we've sort of spoken about was facilitating opportunities for staff to get together just for that collegial support and that peer support, and things like a morning tea can actually do a bit of wonder in this area. And also continue to check in with staff who may have been impacted by the critical incident as well. And I guess the other thing we've also looked into would be sort of mapping out and together working in collaboration with the emergency response team. It's about considering mapping out services and referral pathways for students and staff who may require that further extra support. And also looking at resources and support for parents and carers, because as they support the children as well, they too may also need some of that support.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Joyce. That's been such a comprehensive look at some of the different parts that make up a preparedness and then a response to a critical incident. So thank you for that. And I guess the only question I've got is, what happens then after that immediate and short-term support has been put in place and has happened?
Sure. So I guess, Mel, depending on the needs of the school community, BU would be able to provide some follow-up consultations, support for the school as they head towards their recovery. And in this particular circumstance for Jane and her school team, and they were marvellous, we provided some check-in contacts as the school headed back towards recovery, just to see how things are tracking for them.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's really good. And before we head to some questions, we wanted to leave you with 4 actions that you can take with you today, even amongst the changing circumstances that schools are finding themselves in at the moment.
Yes, thanks, Mel. So, and firstly, I guess we can't miss this one. It's really about having an up-to-date plan, which is really crucial. And look, secondly, we want to prioritise our continual learning as individuals, as staff team and across the school community. And we want to learn about mental health and wellbeing from BU and other evidence-based sources. And we also want to learn a little bit more about trauma-informed practices and also learn from our experiences of being in a critical incident and how we've responded. The other thing we also want to provide is a responding learning environment for students too, so that when a critical incident do occur, and unfortunately they will at some point, we learn how to provide ongoing support to those who need it, whilst ensuring that children and young people have the opportunity to process what happened in a safe and supportive manner. And also, thirdly, we want to embed some supportive structures in place and processes and relationship in everyday school life. We are actually doing this quite well in schools, but sometimes we can also make it a priority. And we want to engage students through maintaining that sense of safety and belonging and offering that support, flexible learning opportunity, and really also to support staff too through a genuine concern about their health and well-being. And we also want to support families through multiple opportunities to connect and access support through schools and also other help-seeking avenues. So what we really wanted to see is a healthy community, although under these really rough circumstances, it contains that distress and differences, and it will be able to help itself out, but also identifying when to reach out for external support when it's needed.
Great.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing also, and this is really vital, is that remembering that both you and your colleagues may also be impacted too. So it's really important to look after your well-being and act as support if you need to. So finding ways to cope with stress and connecting and spending time in a positive way with other people and asking for help if that's needed is all important practices. So being comfortable asking and giving that support really reduces any fear around help seeking in workplaces, and it's a really crucial part in building that supportive culture across the school community. And I guess finally, Mel, we want to focus on collaboration with the community.
Excellent.
So, yeah, with both relevant organisations and people across learning community. And I guess more broadly, when preparing for and responding to a critical incident. So in quieter times, what we want to do is actually normalise and signing up some of those collaborations and agreements with community organisations and professionals. And also, we want to have input from our educators, our community, at all levels of the planning, involving students and parents as well in response and recovery efforts. And so, by having this clear referral pathway, both within the school and external from the school, This is actually going to empower everyone to play a part, but still act within the scope of the role. And this really helps people to feel safe and supported with this whole school approach.
I think that's great, that idea of being able to act within the scope of our roles but still to be doing our part. That's how we all want to be. So that's a great point. Thank you.
Absolutely, Mel.
And we've covered a great deal in this session. Firstly, by looking at some of the reactions that children and young people might have once they've experienced a critical incident, including some of those traumatic reactions and responses, and followed by a review of critical incident management and how we might go about that. And we think it's really worthwhile to stop for a moment and just think of any learnings to take away from all that Joyce has shared with us today. Note them down, but we'd also really love you to share them in the chat box too. And of course, we've all experienced and recently experienced and are still experiencing the effects of the pandemic on school education here in Australia, and the time will come in the future for us to be able to reflect on that experience as well. But for now, if there's something from the session that seems to be relevant and appropriate for your school, please do capture it somewhere so that you can action it in the future. I know that some of the things that I'm really conscious of have been that idea of being really clear about roles and responsibilities and tasks so that we know exactly what's expected of us and don't have to do that thinking in the moment, that it's actually already been thought through and considered at a time that's much calmer. And I really like Joyce's point too about reaching out and making those relationships with community agencies now, and particularly now too, to support our families and who might need a little bit of extra support given what they've been through in the last few months. But that proactive approach to already having relationships in place puts us in a really good stead if and when a critical incident might unfortunately occur. And thank you to those that have shared some of their learnings. So Kathy suggested that she's going to go back and check out their plan status at school and see where it's up to. And Rachel shared to be clear on her role within the school's critical incident response. And we find that to be really useful too, to know what our own role is within the response plan.
Absolutely, Mel.
And Colleen has shared, Joyce, a whole school approach plus to review and collaborate.
Absolutely, and that's so important to be able to have all parties being able to be part of this plan, so everybody is actually quite clear on what the roles that they have, and that collaboration really provides some really great and excellent conversations and considerations during a critical incident and prior to a critical incident.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for those great comments. And now we might move on. Oh, we've got one that's just popped in from Suzanne, slowing down the classroom routines and assigning roles to multiple staff, not all one staff member.
Absolutely, and it's vital that we actually share out this role during a critical incident response so that people would actually know that this is the part of the task that I'm responsible for, whilst other tasks are being taken care of, and that gives people a peace of mind as well during a critical incident. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. And thanks also, Joyce, so much for your presentation. That's just been terrific. Are there any final words that you'd like to leave us with before we take a couple of questions?
Sure, Mel. So I guess a proactive and informed learning community, it's more likely to respond effectively to a critical incident, and you can be informed of all the potential impacts of the critical incident. But also remember that, monitoring reactions and all those information can really guide you about a child's need for additional support should a critical incident occur, and also offering support to your community, including those through your wellbeing team or local health services, and also consider the impacts on families, and of course as educators how you can take care of yourself and of your colleagues too during these uncertain times. And also a final comment that I would like to leave with all of us today is that despite of this unprecedented pandemic times, we really have truly witnessed the agility, the resilience, and the adaptability of our educators and of schools that we can be truly, truly proud of. And to this, we really thank you for all the work that you've actually been doing for your school and for your students and for the school community.
Yeah, thank you very much. As Joyce said, we have certainly witnessed it ourselves, and it's inspiring and a privilege to be able to support in some small ways too. Thank you, and I guess one of our important messages is to keep taking care of yourself as well as taking care of the students and all of those other people around you. And we've now got just a couple of minutes to take questions from the chat box. And one's come through from Carol, which is just asking Joyce, how do we best support staff who might be having some difficulties?
I guess firstly, it might be sort of looking at, what might be potentially, or perhaps having a simple conversation, a check-in conversation to see how things are tracking. And look, if, and this could be an informal support, so that may be having a chat with a colleague or a family or a friend. But on other avenues, it might be that, okay, so if you would like further support around this or other perhaps talking to someone else who might be sort of a professional in this area, it might be looking at a referral to perhaps, utilising the Employees Assistance Program if you do have that, or even via your GP as well. So potentially getting access to that professional support if needed.
Great. And just to add too, that BU itself has a really great range of resources around wellbeing and self-care, and some good links to some online support as well that you might like to consider sharing with others within the staff group.
Another thing, thanks Mel. So I guess another thing that would be a good consideration is that from the Black Dog Institute, there is a really good template for self-care templates. So a lot of educators actually find that quite helpful. It's a short one-page form where you can actually put in, some of the things that I could do as part of my self-care, and it divides up into sort of different compartments, your physical, your emotional, health. So looking at all different aspects of your own self-care. So that could be a very useful tool as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Joyce. And taking the time to plan to care for ourselves is really important. And Joyce, one other question. Who should be on your emergency response team?
Sure. Look, and I guess, this would, and because your school is unique and you know best and who might be most well placed to be part of this emergency response team, I think one thing to really highlight here is that rather than having people or names of people on this emergency response team, it's really about looking at the roles which this emergency response team would play. And this kind of makes sense because if you're assigning a person to that particular role and that person happens to be on leave or no longer at the school, you might want someone else to fill in that role. So identifying the actual roles that might be needed would be probably foremost important. And then you can have, a few members who can also stepping in should the first person may not be, absent or may not be available. So identifying different roles would be, I guess, the key to go in terms of identifying who should be on the team.
That's such a great point. Thank you, Joyce. And just a final comment before we move into our concluding slides. Emma has shared that I think we need to focus on the short-term and long-term processes, making sure that the community do not feel forgotten, keeping communication open, and making sure we've got implementation in place for our staff, and most importantly, what our plan is. Thanks, Emma. That's such a great summary of many of the important messages that we've shared today.
Thanks, Emma. That's wonderful. Okay, so I guess before we finish our presentation today, we'd just really like to encourage you to continue to engage with BU and learn more and keeping up to date with some of the tools and resources that we do have on BU. So if you are a learning community and have not yet implemented the BU whole learning community approach, we encourage you to register online and getting started with support from a BU consultant. And if you're looking for resources to support you with specific needs and concerns, such as adapting to change, you're more than welcome to visit our website at bu.edu.au. And finally, keeping up to date with BU resources, events and tools, and we've got tips on Facebook, LinkedIn and Twitter. And also we've got a BU YouTube channel that you can subscribe to receive some updates on new videos from BU.
Well, thank you very much again, Joyce, for your presentation today. It's been really comprehensive and left us all with a lot to think about and to check our plans and to see what we might need to do next. And thank you too for joining us for this session. We really appreciate you taking time in your busy schedules, especially at the moment, to attend. And we really hope that you can take that time to look after yourselves too.
So thank you very much everybody for your time, and hope that we've provided a bit of food for thought today, and take care of yourselves. Thank you.